Hi everyone, I'm Alex, and in today's episode of Community Management 101, let's talk about what is a strategy, what strategies you need to think about, and what strategies you need to consider to start building a growing community that is achieving what you set out to achieve. Now, before we go further, there is a little bit of a caveat, because when people talk about strategies, I often see things like this and other things like that. This is very, very important to plan out and to think about and to keep track of. But I've taken these screenshots out of a textbook for project management. So I want to make sure that when we talk about strategy, we're thinking along the right terms. This is not a strategy, this is a plan. And planning is incredibly important, but it comes after the strategy. You need to have the strategy first before you can start planning out your activities. It's a very important difference, and when people start presenting plans as strategies, I always get a little bit nervous because I'm not entirely convinced or certain that what is behind this plan has actually been thought out into the detail that it should be, in my opinion. So how to think about strategy, and what is the strategy I'm talking about that you need to think about before you start planning? So the strategy is a long-term vision, and from those long-term vision, you can derive values and principles that help make that vision a reality. Those values and principles you can then derive objectives from that help you achieve that long-term vision and make it a reality over time. A different way to think about it is, what do you set out to achieve? What type and kind of community do you want to have? What values and principles do those communities have, and what concepts help you to achieve that goal, that ultimately then lead to what do you need to make those concepts a reality. So when we look about it from a community strategy point of view, when you have the long-term vision with your values and your long-term objectives, you need to think about a few other things. You have the overarching community strategy, which is the long-term vision with the key objectives that you're looking to achieve. So what is the community vision? What type of community do you want? Do you want to have a very wholesome community? Do you want to have a very funny community? Do you want to build a game with the community? Or do you want the community to do something else for you? Do you want to bring them into the production process? All of these are questions that help you define the vision of community. And sometimes the studio or the founders of a studio have a pretty good idea of what they want to achieve with community. They may not be able to put it into words or to get a catchy little sentence out there of what the long-term vision is, but it's quite possible that they have a very strong idea of what they want to achieve in community, and then they hire community people to bring that a reality. But it also means that that vision is quite possibly given to us, and that is perfectly fine. We can work with that very well. We then look into the content strategy. And the content strategy is, what do you need to do from a community point of view to bring that community vision to reality. So you need to define your content strategy based on the overarching community strategy, and that leads into the channel strategy of, based on the content, what channels is the best suited to have the most impact and to make that vision a reality. So you can see there's actually 3 strategies required before you can really go into the planning that you need to think about and define through before even doing anything else. So I'm going to use an illustrative example here, and it's a very default. It's not thought through. It's just to illustrate the point of how to think about it and how you can think about going about building these strategies for your community. So let's imagine, and our default example, our long-term vision is we want to build a wholesome community. Now we're going to derive some values from that long-term vision of the wholesome community, and we say a wholesome community requires a sense of trust and safety. It requires a kind of sense of looking at the world and the glass is half full, or looking for the silver lining approach. It requires mutual support and encouragement, not just from the brand, but also from the users to each other. And last but not least, it requires a sense of presence and listening. And now you have our long-term vision of what the wholesome community that we're wanting to achieve, with our core 4 pillars or values that bring us closer to making that a reality. Now, based on those values, we're now going to derive a few objectives. For trust and safety, we say we need to deliver on promises, we need to root out bad apples in the community, and our actions from the brand side match the words. On the glass half full side, we can say things like we focus on improvements, we acknowledge issues with an action plan. On the mutual support side, it's a topic of like positive meme culture, showing support for each other for trying. And this is also in line with the social norm building of what a community is, which is the very first presentation that we had here in this series. This is where the social norms come in that we can help define with our objectives and our values for the wholesome community. And for the present and listening, we can say that we want to have substantial communication, regular communication, and the closed feedback loop. Now, these are quite a few objectives that you set out, and these objectives can be adjusted, they need to be measured, and you can also change them. You can say that this is my year 1 focus to building the wholesome community, and then I have a year 2 focus of building a wholesome community based on the performance and where we are at in the process of getting closer to making the wholesome community a reality. This again is a long-term process, and it doesn't happen overnight, and a few pieces of content will not make the wholesome community a reality. So now that we have our core objectives derived from our long-term vision and approach, as well as our values, let's look into an example of what we can do content-wise that helps us achieve these objectives. And when I say the word content, I mean it in the broadest possible sense. When you hear content, you often think about, oh, I need to make a social post, I need an asset, or I need to make a video. Think about it broader than that. A reply to a player can be a piece of content. An activity at Gamescom can be a piece of content. So content is in the broadest possible sense, and these are not thrown out. Do not pause the presentation to have a look at what I'm putting here. It's just the example is let's deliver on promises. So we need implemented feedback list and patch notes. We have update maintenances happening as advertised. They don't fall short, which is more of an internal topic. Rooting out bad apples there needs to be an ability to report players, and action needs to be taken against undesirable behavior. How do we moderate, which is an entirely topic content-wise that actually happens on the internal side, and how do we work internally with reported players? What can we do to help in-game moderation and things like that? It's not necessarily us moderating the content, but helping the studio think about in-game moderation and reporting players. When we say action measures words, again, it's a case of like discarded feedback gets a reason why rather than getting ignored. And when the community manager says, I'll check or I'll send it to the team, maybe we should circle back. And these are like examples and principles in terms of content in the widest possible sense that help us bring those objectives to reality. Focus on improvement, patch notes and roadmaps, FAQs, workarounds for acknowledging issues with actions, and you get the idea of there's a lot of different types of content that you can do, and in the broadest possible sense possible to think about content. Like this is 2 content pieces or principles for an objective, but you can also have 10 or you can have only 1. It depends on how much capacity you have, all the things you have time to do, and what you're looking to achieve. When you have all of these mapped out, you will also be able to identify similarities or different pieces of content or one piece of content supporting more than one objective, which is quite handy to have. Or you also find things that are actually like potentially linked. So when we look at the red ones right now, it's conversation management very much has a very important aspect with tone of voice, and our culture building when it comes to community, and the principle of I'll check and I'll get back to you is a part of conversation management, which again, in the broadest sense of content is quite a critical activity. But you will also find more subtopics, shall we say, where moderation apparently is a key bit to, in this example, building a wholesome community where conversation management needs to be a point, conversation moderation needs to be on point, but also on the in-game side, not just on the outside of the game. Or things like dev diaries and roadmaps, perhaps these content pieces can be combined, where you make a dev diary and you present the roadmap as part of it. So now that you have all of your content pieces arranged, you're going to arrange them however many they be, and we're going to define the format. What format best supports the activity that we're looking to do? And then we're going to map it across the entire channels of what channels are best suited to support that format and what activity we do. So on the top, we can say, let's implement feedback and patch notes. We can say, all right, we define our primary channel on the website. This is where we're going to post our patch notes, and then we're going to redirect from other channels to it. But this is where the full patch notes live. The entire thing lives on the website, and we make sure that our implemented feedback from the community has this dedicated section in the listing. We then define our secondary channels, in this example here, Discord and Reddit. And we say, okay, on Discord and Reddit, I can highlight certain pieces from the patch notes, like, for example, the implemented feedback, and still link to the primary source where you have the entirety list of the website. We're then going to define the channels that help us redirect and drive traffic to the primary channel. And we're also going to say, well, these are channels that are not so helpful in supporting this piece of content or in this format of content, so we're not doing any activity on these. And then you do that for the next activity, and then you do that for the next activity, and the next activity you create a massive matrix. And it is a conscious reason that this animation takes about 10 seconds, because it's a very long, laborious process that needs thinking, that needs defining, that needs mapping out, and it is entirely based. You need to first have the long-term vision and your values with objectives to then derive the content from it, and then you can map it out like this, where you can say these pieces of content in that format operate on this primary channel, this secondary channel, get redirected from here and don't have an activity there. Now, it doesn't stop there. The next step then becomes, let's look at a concrete example here in the Dev Diary format. So let's say we want to make Dev Diaries, but we're actually going to do them in the format of a stream. As you can see, the primary channel is Twitch. We have secondary channels and redirect channels. But what comes next now that you have all of this mapped out is for each activity, you need to effectively go into detail and say, okay, I need equipment. I need a location, I need to define of who is on this, what's the run of show, I need to set up Twitch, I need a bot, and so on and so forth. And then you say, okay, in order to achieve that on my primary channel, I need assets, I need setup time, I need a call to action. Do I do drops? All of these kinds of conversations and decisions that need to be made for the primary channel, you then also make forward for the redirect channels and say, okay, I need assets specific for Twitter, for Facebook, for Instagram. You need to define if the Dev Diary stream activity is worthy of a full campaign, as in you're leading up to it. When you remember our momentum presentation of you can use this as a ramp activity, you can use it as a big spike activity. So how big and how important is this Dev Diary stream? Or is a single post enough? And these, again, you need to map out and think about before you do anything else and actually get into detail about every piece of content that you're looking to make. On the secondary channel side, in this example here, YouTube and TikTok, YouTube you could co-stream, or you're definitely going to post a VOD. And on TikTok you can do the cut down, so you can see how one piece of content suddenly explodes almost into multiple pieces of content, multiple activities over time, where you have a 1 hour stream and then you can do highlights from that stream that you also post on TikTok, right? And then you do a summary article on the website after, where once the stream concludes, you post a summary article of this is what was discussed in the stream in the Dev Diary format. Here's also a link to the VOD. And when you have cut downs and shorter versions, then you want to also highlight these on the redirect channels with like an article has been posted and cut downs are available, or post them directly on Twitter. And you need to define this for each and every activity into that level of detail. So you can then go and say, hey, I want to build a Twitch room and a streaming room in the studio, and this head of studio is going to ask you why, and then you can say, well, let me explain to you why, because this is what we're looking to achieve with our values, this is the objective, and we have defined this piece of content as a streaming as the best format, and therefore I need £20,000 to build a streaming room. And it is quite helpful when you do that for all of your activity, because you can always trace this back to the ultimate objective of what you're looking to achieve. And ultimate objectives and long-term strategies, especially community strategies, I've seen offsites for 2 days required to define the overall arching vision of what we want to achieve with community, what values support these, what's the one line, the one sentence that summarizes it all, and what are our key objectives for the year one focus. So this is quite a laborious, intensive process because it has quite a significant impact on all the other activities that follow. Now that we have all that, now we can start planning. And this is where timing and dates come in. Not up to this point. Up to this point, you can do it all without having any dates, any launch dates. And there's no need to pause the presentation. This is completely random, so don't read into it. But you effectively can now start building in these blocks on the calendar where you have the main activity of like a reveal, a beta, and a launch. You have activities moving up. You are also mapping your other activities alongside that are running besides the major activities. But what I also like to do is I include internal topics, like how often do I report on topics, on the community activity, on the community health. So if I map that internally as part of my plan, I can actually communicate to sometimes the nervous higher-ups of when they can expect a report on a community activity, health of activity, and so on. And you can map, it says etc. here, but you can map anything internally onto your plan as well that is in helping supporting internally or externally. But it all comes down to what you're looking to achieve and how you're managing the entire thing. What's important to keep in mind is that you need to have these strategies in place first before you go into the planning detail. And just planning activities without having the other thing. Sometimes I've heard actually in some studios, the higher ups go, well, why are we doing this? It feels a bit random. And as soon as the why are we doing this question comes up, means that the strategies that I've just explained, they don't exist, or they haven't been communicated, they haven't been understood, maybe they haven't been included. So as soon as you have those strategies in place, it's much easier to explain of why we do an activity in order to achieve something, rather than start with the planning of activity and then it just goes a bit like, why are we suddenly needing a streaming room, and why do I need to spend £20,000 on it, right? So keep in mind that for building a strategy, you don't need to have any dates. You can start building strategies, defining visions, objectives, values, content pieces that support these objectives and values, and then ultimately what channels are best suited for it. You don't need a date. You don't need a live date or a launch date to plan backwards from. These strategies basically longer term than a year or go beyond a launch or a live date. It's your guiding North Star that if an activity comes along from a different team or somebody asks you about doing something else that you're quite happy to include, and you can say, yes, because it supports the long-term vision, or no, we shouldn't be doing this because it doesn't support the long-term vision. Or another example is, let's say marketing informs you that we're going to have a major Gamescom activity that wasn't considered so far. And now you need to include the content piece effectively, that is Gamescom, and say, okay, that's fine. I know what I'm looking to achieve long-term and what my values and principles are. How does Gamescom support me or could help me support one of these objectives? And then I can plan anything around it. The other point that I made is it builds internal confidence. You can easily point towards it, you can easily reference it, and you can easily explain of why you're doing what you're doing. So it's the internal confidence for you, but also for the studio and for the higher ups to be like, yes, we know what we're doing, we have a strategy of what we're looking to achieve, and we have a plan on how to get there. That is quite helpful to build trust even beyond the studio and internal conversations. The way to think about this, or I like to think about it, is dates shift. It's quite common for dates to shift, especially in video games production. The plan shifts with the dates. So if instead of doing an activity in October, we're now doing it in December, it's like, that's fine. We just shift our plan by 2 months backwards and we continue as is. But the strategy does not. The strategy remains because the overarching long-term vision that we're looking to achieve hasn't changed because we're changing the plan by 2 months. It's the long-term what we're looking to achieve strategy. The short term of like, these are the things that we're doing, these are the planned things, and they change with dates, but the strategies do not. The most critical aspects for success include alignment. I cannot stress this enough. Alignment across all departments. If community doesn't know what marketing does, if marketing doesn't know what PR does, if PR doesn't know what community does, and then we have live operations, we have product management, we have the studio itself. If they don't know what the other people are doing, it's very difficult to actually get into planning, let alone build a long-term vision of what it is to achieve. You can make the most wholesome community strategy, but your game is a first-person shooter game that is very competitive and esports related. Not quite sure how wholesome that community is, just by the nature of it. The other thing is, if marketing runs an activity literally the same time that you want to run an activity, it's like align. You need to have conversations. And marketing needs to support community, and community needs to support marketing and PR and CRM. It all needs to come together. Yes, you have your vision of what you're looking to achieve. Marketing has their vision of what they're looking to achieve, but coming together to support them both aligned is absolutely critical for a successful impact on the world and building momentum effectively. One doesn't work without the other. It needs all the departments working together to build that momentum. Communication and information, obviously, you need to communicate your strategy with other people in the studio, and other people in the studio need to communicate what is happening on their side. So you have the information to actually build those strategies and to plan out your activities based on the channel and the content strategy. And it's a shared sense of a goal. That's quite critical. Is the marketing having their vision of what they're looking to achieve, you having your community vision of what you're looking to achieve, aligning them and coming together to understanding each other's goals, then it's much easier to understand how you can support them in order to achieve the goal and how they can support you in achieving that goal. So this is what we think about at Community Consulting when we talk about strategies. And if you like to learn more about the things that we do, of how we can help you build strategies, think about strategies, and build communities, visit us on communityconsulting.com, and I will see you the next time.